over here about getting some Indian rice because actually she's entitled to stuff, And they told her that since her dad had never recorded because his wife wouldn't let him record that, that he was an Indian.
Oh, for crying out loud.
Then she couldn't file any claim because she and her kids are all entitled to, pieces of property and stuff.
Should have been, yeah.
Is that on now, Larry?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It is.
But,
See if we can find some more questions.
well, my mother in 1954 had a stroke. She was living with Ed and Mary at that time. She wouldn't live with any of the rest of the family. Your mother and Dad and Millie, and I tried to get her to live with us and she wouldn't do it. And so she recovered from that stroke in 1954. And then Mary found a new doctor for her, Dr. Jones. He was just a young guy, and Mama just fell in love with this guy. He just, every time he'd see, he'd hug and kiss her and take care of her and everything. And then he bought a house about 2 doors down from Mary's house. So Millie and I came up early in 1955, and for her birthday or something. And Dr. Jones come over and to see Mama, and I said, because Mama was working out in the backyard, in the garden, I said, Doctor, why don't you tell her not to? And he said, if she was my mother, I'd let her do whatever she wants to. And he didn't come out in so many words, but he was telling us then that she didn't have long to go. And so anyway, then I believe it was in August of 1955, they went out and they found her, she passed out in the garden and she was face down in the dirt. And Ed picked her up and took her in the house, and she died some 48 hours later. Your mother or Ange or somebody called me, and I was in LA and I was working graveyard shifts at Northrop. And 2 o'clock in the morning, and my foreman come down and he said, Frank, there's a call upstairs for you. It's from your sister. He says, something has happened to your mother. So I went up and they told me, and I called home and got Millie out of bed, and I said, call the airport and see if you can get me a flight to Stockton. Back in those days, you could go from LAX directly to Stockton. And so anyway, she took me to the airport and put me on a plane, and she went back and got packed and stuff like that. She drove the car up to Stockton. Well, anyway, when I got there, I don't know who picked me up, either your mother or Dad or Mary or Ed or somebody did. And I remember watching Helen, she went over, because Mother was comatose, and they told me that she was just waiting for me to get there. So Helen went over and patted her on, she said, Mama, Frank is here. And I could see my mother's eyes kind of blinking, And we stayed in there and talked and visited and whatnot. And I was hoping that Mother would understand, But I don't know. But then, after a bit, Millie and I went across the street to see, what's her name? Mary's neighbor.
Yeah.
And we were out there in front of her garage talking when Helen came over and she said, well, it's all over with. His mother just passed away. And that was in, I believe, August of 1955. And you remembered, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was then at the cemetery that we let Millie pick the spots, to bury her in. Because where my dad was buried, there was nothing available out there. And back in those days, they didn't, or people with money went in and they bought whole, big plots where they could bury a whole family. But my folks didn't have that kind of money, so.
Yeah, sometimes you find names that mean something. They translate to something. Does DeCicco translate to anything?
I keep getting letters from some outfit that claims they get all your history background. And Mel started to pursue it one time, and there was nobody of my family, but they claimed they had him, I said, how could they have you? But anyway, I got a letter here just a few days ago from one of these outfits.
Careful.
Mhm.
This is coming the past week.
Mhm.
I'll give it to you because I'm not gonna do anything about it. I have no desire in
Uh-huh.
wanting to know.
Um, just thinking back about your brothers and sisters and mother and father, are there any other stories that were interesting that you'd like to tell us
Well,
about?
one of them is about Sam. We were talking about Sam and Henrietta a while ago, when right out of the blue she started drinking, and she took off with somebody, and left Sam there with those two little kids by himself. Millie and I had just gotten married, or hadn't been married very long, so he called and asked if Millie would go over and stay with the kids while we were at work. So she said sure. So I'd drive her over, or Sam would come and get her or something, and she would stay there with the kids, and then she'd make our dinner at night. Well, one night we sitting there eating, and the front door opened, and Henrietta come in, and she was drunker than a skunk. And she walked up behind him, and Sam was sitting there, and he never said anything, never opened his mouth. And she started in on him. And finally she called him a black dago son of a bitch or some such thing as that, and hauled off and slapped him. He got up out of the chair, and he turned her around, he grabbed her by the butt and the back of and he walked her up, and he threw her right through the screen door. Never bothered to open it, he just tossed her right through the screen door, and she fell out there on the pavement. He said, and that was the only mouth, he said, if you ever show up around here, I'll kill you. And that was the last we ever saw of her.
Mhm.
So anyway, she later on married
How's
this
the weather out?
this guy that had fathered the kid that she had, because she come home suddenly one time before she'd taken off, and she said that she was pregnant. And in the earlier times, why she'd been after Sam, getting to go down and get castrated, you know. And he went down and had a, what do you call them?
Vasectomy?
Yeah, vasectomy. So he knew the kid wasn't his, but here she's got one in her belly. She later on married this guy. He was a Mexican. And she died at 47, I think. And Sam wouldn't go to the funeral. He wouldn't let the kids go. And I understand that Bobby's dead now, too, hasn't he? Or did you know? Or did
Robert,
you?
I think so, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was it a heart attack?
He said he was in the hospital getting ready to have a kidney operation or something, or
I think he was getting ready for open heart surgery.
Yeah, I think so. They were gonna do
The bypasses. And
what's her name?
the girl,
Yeah. No, but I mean
Lorraine.
Mary's granddaughter,
Oh, Marlinda?
Marlinda. She called me and told me about it
Yeah.
Have you heard from her recently?
once in a while. Last time I saw her, she put on a lot of weight. You know, she used to be as skinny as a toothpick. Well, she put on a lot of weight, and I said, "What happened to you?" She's, "Well, everybody's been talking to me for years about putting on some weight, and now everybody's surprised that I have." And the last time I saw Linda, she was living in,
Idaho or something.
anyway, she was still working for Sears Roebuck.
In Boise.
Or who
She's in Boise, Idaho.
is she?
Thought she had a construction company.
Linda?
Yeah.
She was working for Sears.
Unless her new husband is part of it, I don't know, I never heard that.
How's those prices compared to what you weigh in Stockton?
Oh, I'm not really even, they're probably about the same.
How did you meet Aunt Millie?
She came up to see your dad and Helen, and I had met Jenny, sometime before that, not a great deal of time, but sometime before, and your mother and I went over to Fanny's, and Helen picked Jenny up or something. I don't remember how Jenny got involved, but we were there at Fanny's, and Helen asked me, we used to go to there was 3 ballrooms, and your mother used to go quite frequently with, and I was dating a girl named Irma Kramer at that time. And I was on the phone talking to Irma, and Jenny was sitting there, and I eyeballed her, that's a pretty little girl. So I asked her, I said, if she'd like to go to the dance. She said, no, I'm engaged. She said, I don't go out with anybody. And I said, well, Helen and your mother and, anyway, it was about 12 or 15 of us, and we used to go to the Dreamland Ballroom, the Cinderella Ballroom, and the Manteca, whatever they call it down there in Manteca. And we'd go in as a bunch, 12 or 15 of us, and half of them were women. And we'd take over a corner of the ballroom, and that's where we'd dance in our own little group. And if somebody else wanted to dance with one of our women, well, we left it up to them. If we wanted to go, we'd ask permission from the guy that, And Jenny said no, but Jenny and I became fast friends, and we were always very good friends. But Mike was a different cat. He wasn't like your father was, in no way, shape, or form. Your dad never met a stranger, and he was always. If I got a slice of bread you need to bite, it's yours. But Mike was not that way, never was. And I don't mean we ever got into fisticuffs or anything like this, but we got into a little hassle one time, but he said something to Millie or whatever it was, and I heard it, and I blew my stack, and I let him off, So we were never real close with Mike, but Jenny was a different cat, different feather altogether, so anyway. But Millie had come up to see your mother and dad. They were living on B Street there at that time.
And they were married already.
Yeah. And I come in, and Mama said, I was at work, and I come in at noontime, and I don't know, Mama said, have you met Les's sister? And I said, no, I haven't. And why? Is she here? And he said, yeah, she's over at Helen's. So I take off and I go over to Helen's. And so I just walk in, and here's Millie and Melba sitting on the couch, and they thought I was Helen's boyfriend. And because I walked in, I said, excuse me, is Helen around? No, she's not. She went to the grocery store. So we started shooting the breeze there a little bit, and I said, do you have any idea when she should be back any time? So when come back, why then your mother introduced me to Millie and Melba. And, it just took off from there.
Cool.
And she died 3 months before our 50th anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then I met Frida through her sister. I met her not too long after Millie passed away.
This pretty lady over here?
Yeah.
Oh, this one.
Millie and I used to go to the Adventist church, and we'd been working up in Sacramento, and when we moved to Stockton, we went to the same church, but we didn't like the preacher. I mean, he'd get out in left field and he couldn't find his way back. And so I know, I'm sure that you met Bill Hickerson, Louis Hickerson.
I don't recall the name.
Well, anyway, he was a very good friend and one of our tenants, and he had been one of Pappy's steam or submarine buddies. So he and his wife was crippled like I am and paralyzed from a series of strokes, and they come in the office looking for a place to rent. And I couldn't understand what she was saying, and neither could her husband. Millie could get every word she said, understood everything she wanted. So they became fast friends. And so I had to go out in the system when I come back, and Millie says, well, they rented the duplex across the street. So anyway, been just a few days after that, I come back in the system, and here Millie was a little agitated about something. I said, what's the matter? She said, well, Louis just left. And I said, well, what? He come in to pay his rent? Yeah. And he said that we ought to go try his church. Because she asked him, how come you're all dressed up, Louis? And he said, well, I'm going to church. And he starts out the door, and he turned around and he said, by the way, have you and Frank found a church yet? And she said, no. And he said, well, why don't you come to our church and see how you'd like it? And she said, what's that? And he says, it's Church of Christ. And I had never heard of the Churches of Christ. So she told me all this, and I said, well, what do you think? Well, that night we went. And we'd been to the Church of Christ not any more than 3 or 4 times when Millie had the stroke and died 7 months later. And it was there, Frida's sister or 2 sisters were there in Stockton. They were going to this Church of Christ there on El Dorado Street, that big one. And so after Millie passed away, I kept on going because the preacher, the assistant preacher, used to come to the house and visit with Millie every day when she was, in her last, and he'd come over and he'd do the church deals on, get her, anoint her with oil and all this and pray for her and everything. So we became very good friends, and he was the one that conducted her services for us, and then he was the one that married Frida and me. And anyway, I met Grace Obius, the one that's up in Rogers now, the sister, Frida's sister. And Les and I used to take Grace and the sister Lee out to dinner. And Lee was kind of funny. I mean, she was a little, her elevator didn't run up to the top floor. But I mean, she was a sweet lady and a very lovely person. And Les and I used to take them out to dinner. We used to go to that, is it Long's restaurant there where we used to go for prime rib dinners?
Lions?
Lions, yeah.
Oh, okay.
On El Dorado and
Right.
Pacific.
Pacific and Yokets or something.
Yeah. Well, we used to go there, and then we'd go to that King's Cafe in the mall. We'd take Grace and Lee there, We'd have a lot of fun.
And when was this?
This was in, after Millie passed away in 1984, 85, somewhere like that. Your mother was gone.
Mm-hmm.
Because when Les met Frida, he says, does she have any other sisters?
Uh-huh.
So hey, we better start thinking about
Yes.
going to Van Buren.
Yeah.
Okay.
We got to meet them there at
Take
12
an
o'clock.
intermission.
And that's where his forebears came from, was from Butcher Holler
Watch
in
your eyes.
Tennessee.
I'll turn on the light again.
And the family name was Webb,
It's okay.
their grandfather. Yeah, well, he always hated Tennesseans because he worked with them. He said, is that thing on?
Yes.
Did you want to turn this other light on overhead here?
Let's see. Oh yeah, that helps. So.
Anyway, before the old man died, I started digging into some of this stuff and went back to Tennessee and in Butcher Holler where what's her name?
Loretta.
Yeah, where she was from, and that's where your grandparents came from. Frank Minton's forebears came from there. Now, where Grandma Minton's family came from, I don't know. As far as I know, they originated up in Idaho or somewhere up there.
I thought it was Nebraska. Idaho, I know it was her.
Because Millie was born on the Snake River in Nissa, Oregon. And their grandfather used to run a butcher shop up there. And one time she and I went up into Canada, and all through up in that part of the country. On the way back, we stopped by there, and she showed me the house that she was born in. It was still a little ramshackle place that the Mittens lived in. And it was there that your grandfather told me about catching this big sturgeon, you know. Said it weighed 700 or 800 pounds, and I went, ha ha ha. So they